Hello, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Captain Review. Today, I'm going to be going through kind of setup process for the ElegooSlicer software. This is to go along with the Elegoo Centauri Carbon I just picked up. Please click on one of my previous videos that I released just a few short days ago with the unboxing. This is to help those of you who maybe are just getting one or thinking about getting one, how to get kind of the best settings you can get out of it. Ultimately, the one thing that I really want to point out to you is a disclaimer. And I'm going to start off with this disclaimer first and tell you that this is not, and I repeat, this is not a definitive guide on what you should do, or is it the exact settings that you should use. Every printer setup is different. What works perfectly for my printer, my filament, and my environment may not work for yours. And that's true for any advice you find online, including mine. So your hardware, your materials, and your expectations for a finished print are unique. No one else can define the perfect settings for you. That said, what I can offer is a strong starting point. The settings I've personally refined and relied on for almost 2 years with my Bambu Lab X1C. These are dialed in and proven on that platform. I've recently begun adapting them for use with the Centauri Carbon into the ElegooSlicer. While I've only been running this for 5 or 6 prints, I guess maybe more up to 8 now, with these settings on the Carbon so far, early results are very promising, and I am seeing prints that are coming off of that Carbon that rival what comes off the X1C. So with that said, first thing you're going to need to do is go on over to the Elegoo website, elegoo.com. I'll put a link down below, and go to software and go to the ElegooSlicer. And once you click in here, you're going to choose the ElegooSlicer version for if you're using Windows, Mac ARM, Mac x86. And also, it's great to have the download here for the user manual. So once you've got it downloaded and installed, I don't think you need me to go through the install process. It's pretty straightforward at this point. You're going to go ahead and launch it. And it's going to come up with some basic settings. You're going to see over here on the left, it's just going to probably come up, if I remember correctly, to this 0.20 millimeter standard Elegoo nozzle setting. And you know what? Absolutely. Print 1 or 2 or 3 things in this just to kind of get a comparison to see what it looks like after you've made your changes, because you need a control. And then what I'm calling here is my 0.20 perfect settings with 20% ironing, and I'll explain that in a minute. So to give you a quick overall of the printing software, if you're not familiar with the Bambu Studio or OrcaSlicer, you're going to connect your printer up here by clicking on this and putting the IP address in that your printer picked up when you connected it to Wi-Fi. And you're going to hit test and OK, and that's all you're going to need to do in there. Your printer's going to show up. You'll be able to send prints to it wirelessly, no issues. One thing of note here, in case I forget to mention it later. So if you have an item on your build plate here and you slice it, and then you go to print it and you send it to that printer, if you have not cleared the print that was previously on the printer, first of all, physically, and second of all, in the software, you're going to have issues. First of all, if you physically didn't remove it, you're going to damage your printer. So always make sure that there is nothing on your build plate before you hit print. Second of all, you'll be able to send the print to the printer no matter what, but it will not start printing until you physically have cleared what's on the screen on your Carbon. So if you have something printed and you went and removed it and then you send a print job to it, it's not going to go anywhere because you did not click cancel or done. Because when you finish a print on the Elegoo Carbon, it asks you to basically either say, yes, it's completed, or print it again, print another one. So just make sure you've cleared that off when you actually physically remove the print. Okay. So you've got your printer connected via Wi-Fi. Most of you are going to want to use the textured PEI plate. If you're watching this video, you probably are relatively new to this, so just stick with this for now. You can start experimenting with the smooth plates and everything later. For filament, we're going to get into this a little bit. I use Sunlu PLA Plus, always have, love it. I highly recommend it. But what you can do is you can go up here to your calibrations eventually. You don't have to do this right now, but you're going to want to start to kind of fine tune and dial things in. And what you can do is you can go through temperature, flow rate, using this recommended one here, and pressure advance as really your three foundations for calibration. And the great thing about this is they provide a great tutorial, and this is just the OrcaSlicer tutorial. But you can go through and you can see what you're supposed to do and what results mean and how to configure all of that with flow rate and pressure advance. And if you do like the temp tower, it's all here. They walk you through it. It's pretty good. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here because they've got it pretty well laid out. Most people can follow it without issue. If not, shoot me a message. We'll maybe I can give you a little more detail or another video. But once you get all of those calibrations from running all of those tests, you can come in here, and I clicked on this little pencil pen thing on the paper next to the filament, and you can make some changes. In here, I changed the vendor to the Sunlu, and everything's pretty much default, with the exception of I've changed my flow rate, and I've changed my pressure advanced, and I've changed my nozzle temperature from what their default is if you were to choose the Elegoo basic PLA. I've made these changes, and these match pretty much what I have on the X1C. And I thought it was kind of interesting that even after going through all of the calibration tests on the Centauri Carbon or in this software here, the numbers came out almost identical. So just keep that in mind, that you're going to want to make some of these adjustments later down the road, and this is where you do it. But for now, I would just go with the base Elegoo, and I think it's called the Elegoo PLA or PLA Plus, or even if you're just maybe just go with the generic PLA if you're not using the Elegoo and you're using a Sunlu. Just start there and just see what you get. So now once you go down a little further here in quality, we got a layer height. You're not necessarily going to mess with this. There's really no need to. All of these are defaults. Seam position. Yeah, you can start to experiment that if you want to see where your seam's going to appear on whatever it is you're printing. And I, quite frankly, never really mess with this. Some people say one way, some people say another. I find that if it's a nice even seam down the side, it's just easier to sand off and move on. Okay, so in precision, I didn't really mess with a lot in here. The one thing I did was the elephant foot compensation layers. This is a little bit different in the X1C, but because I haven't really had enough prints on here yet, I haven't really messed with anything in here, so I left all this default, but I did change it in Bambu Studio. For ironing, I turned this on, and you don't have to, but I turned this on for any prints that have a flat surface facing up. And it does add significant time to your print. So just be aware of that. If you're going to turn on ironing, you're going to increase the time on your print by quite a bit. I do all top surfaces. I do rectilinear. My ironing speed is at 30. I think on the X1C it's at 50, but in here their default was 30, and I left it there, and it's doing a pretty good job. Iron flow. Ironing flow, I think, is probably the most important setting when it comes to ironing, because if you have it too high, what you end up with is on the edges when you're actually printing, and I want to zoom in here to give you a flat area, you'll get buildup on the edge. So you'll get a nice flat surface here, and then you'll have this little notch where it built up and kind of pushed the filament to the edge, and then went back and did the same thing on this side, and then comes back and does another one right next to it. So you end up with not very clean corners. So dialing this in can be very important. I don't think I've quite done it yet with the Elegoo um, slicer software. I tried 15. I think it was a little too low. I've done 20, and I think that's pretty good. But I also have just done the flow calibration as well. So we'll do a little more experimenting in here and see what we come up with. With wall generator, I like to go with Arachne. This is all personal preference. If you like classic, by all means, use classic. I just think Arachne gives you a kind of a little better feel, particularly if you're going to be really trying to get a nice looking wall out of your print. If you're not that worried about it, then it doesn't matter. But this really helps, particularly if you're going to be doing a lot of like smooth sanding, or you want some nice smooth like metal surfaces that shouldn't have any distortion to them. Choose Arachne here. I think the rest of these settings are default. Printing walls order, inner to outer, I think is good. Wall loops auto. Yeah, I think everything here is pretty much exactly the same. I don't think there's much that I've changed that are different than the default settings. I find that avoid crossing walls is something you're going to want to look at when you get into multicolor. Right now, that's not even an issue you got to worry about with the carbon, so don't worry about it. Just remember that the captain told you when we do get that multicolor system that that's something you're going to want to turn on. All right, looking back down through the bridging, I think everything here is by default. Detect overhang, make printable, yeah. So everything there is fine. So let's move on to strength. So in the strength, I think the default in Bambu Studio is 2, if I'm not mistaken. I think in here it was 3. I like 4. And the reason I like 4 is because if you're going to be sanding a lot of the whatever you print down, and particularly if there's imperfections that you really need to get rid of, doing a wall loop of 4 gives you a good solid base that you can sand way down. So moving on, I like the top surface pattern to be rectilinear. I just find that it kind of give it a little more smoothness to it. And the same with the bottom surface. Does it really matter? Not necessarily, because you're going to be sanding anyways. Just think that personally, and again, personal preference, this is not a definitive guide whatsoever, like I said at the beginning. I think rectilinear, you spend less time at the end of your, when you're trying to finish up your print, when you use rectilinear, because you have less to sand. But again, personal preference, you may find that it's completely different for you. Okay, for infill, I think 15 to 20% is pretty good. I have recently, I guess within the last several months, been using the newer, and I'm making quotes with my fingers, newer crosshatch infill pattern. And I think it does a really good job. It's, first of all, providing a nice, dense internal support system for the walls and the top of your prints. But the one thing that I find that it does really well in supporting the walls is that if you're using one of the other options, like a grid, you end up with these spaces on your wall that could warp a little bit. And then when you go to sand it, you'll get high spots and low spots. What I find is crosshatch really helps avoid that. So use it for now. Try some prints with the other settings if you want to. By all means, do whatever you want with these. But again, this is just a base for you to start off with if you're not too familiar with it. Infill solid, internal solid infill pattern. Rectilinear again, why not? I don't necessarily have a very good reason why I choose that. I just happen to think that it just gives you a little more support. When you get down to advanced here, I really didn't make any adjustments to this. It's all pretty much the way it was by default. Looking at the differences in speed between the ElegooSlicer and the Bambu Studio, there's really not much difference. They're very similar, which in a way is kind of surprising given the price difference between the two machines, that they both can print the same quality prints at the speeds that they are printing at. But for the most part, as you go through and look through these different speeds here, you're not going to make any changes to any of this unless you start running into some issues with quality or print wall quality. I trust that Elegoo knows what their printer can do, and I leave it at that. Now, if you start to experience some issues with print quality and you need to possibly come in here and start adjusting some speeds, I would go slower, not faster. If you're having issues, slower is always better. Actually, I'll take that back. Slower is not always better, but it's better most of the time. And as you dive more into 3D printing and start troubleshooting, you may understand that more than I do, which is not a lot, so take it with a grain of salt. But travel speed, 500 is fine. Acceleration, I didn't make a single adjustment here. Jerk is something that I haven't had to touch since my Creality CR10S 5 days, and I seriously doubt you'll have to mess with anything in here unless you're having some real significant issues or really super trying to fine tune this printer to get the best quality prints out of it you can. Otherwise, you're not going to mess with that. Support's real basic. Stick with normal and auto for now. I have found that with the default settings for supports come right off. They practically fall off the second they come off the printer. Now, as you start to tweak flow rates and do the different calibrations, you may find that supports don't come off as easy or don't support as well. So on overhangs, when you should have support, you may have some stringing where it's kind of sagging down a little lower. So you may come in here and have to start messing around with that. But start with normal, start with default, start with the default angles, and stay there unless you really have a reason to change it. The one thing that I will point out is the Tree Auto used to be my go-to. I absolutely loved it on the Bambu. But what I have found lately is that when running tree supports, I end up running into build issues on my print. The quality issues decline when I use Tree Auto. I wish I had an answer for that, and I wish I had an answer for you guys, and I hopefully will come up with an answer to that and create a video for you. But for now, again, experiment yourself. This is just me giving you my experiences and what I'm seeing now at this point in time. You know, the end of May in 2025. Normal auto seems to be the best way to get as perfect as a print as you can get. But again, please take the time, experiment yourself, and find out what works best for you. I do not use rafts, or very rarely do I use rafts. Obviously, filaments for supports. And in the X1C, what you would do here is you could choose PETG so that the supports come off easier. But for now, I am not having any issues with supports, so stick with what works. If you are having issues with support, you're going to be coming down to this advanced section and you're going to be making some tweaks and edits in here, particularly with your top interface layers, your top interface spacing. You know, this is the spacing of the interface lines and the support between the object and its supports. So just be aware that if you're having issues with supports hanging, in other words, not getting enough support, and the print itself is hanging low, you're going to want to shrink this number down. And if you are having issues with the supports not coming off and sticking to your print, you're going to want to make this number higher. All right, Multimaterial, again, they are prepping for an AMS equivalent, but we have yet to see it or really see any other news about it other than it's possibly coming. So this will become something that you will be working with in the future. One thing I will note that I've learned with my X1C is Prime Tower is always a good option. And again, personal preference. I know there are people out there that disagree with me. But what I find is that having a prime tower really helps with clearing out any filament that may be left so you don't have any cross contamination. And it also helps with any filament that may be kind of stringing along for the ride. And if you've done any printing, you know what I'm talking about, where you'll have the print head go to the back and try to do the wipe. And when it comes back out, there'll be a little piece of filament stuck on there that ends up actually getting stuck in your print somewhere, and you have to cut it off and trim it, or worse yet, you're doing a light box or something similar, and you end up with that stuck inside some light color part of your light box, and it's a completely waste of time. So I like doing the prime tower. I think that it really helps with that. The use prevention would be very helpful, particularly with multicolor prints. And the one thing about the flush into objects infill and support that I found that I did not like was that I found, particularly if you're using a different filament for your supports, that this caused weak spots in my prints. So just be careful when you're doing this. It sounds like a good idea because you're saving filament, but in reality, you're not saving that much in the amount of money. You're just saving what looks like a lot of filament, and technically it's really not. So just be cautious with these if you decide to choose these in the future. All right, for other, I very, very rarely use a skirt. I almost always use a brim, and I almost always use outer and inner brim. Now, if you have an item that you're wanting to really work with, the bottom of it in particular, and you have an opening on the inside, sometimes this can leave a little bit of a foot and that you're going to have to clean up. So just be aware of that. For an item like what I have here, this is not something that I necessarily would need a brim on. And what you're going to end up with is this edge here won't be as clean because you have a brim on it. So you'll end up doing some more cleaning. And one thing to note here is that this is a nice flat surface until you get to right about there. And if you can see how it sort of rolls out. So when you're trying to sand this down, you got to be careful because you're going to get this edge cleaned off from the brim, but be careful not to hit this because then you'll end up sanding that down and it won't look quite right. So just be aware of that. For this one, I don't particularly think that we need a brim, so I'll leave it on auto. If it needs a brim, then it can put it on, but I don't think we will. All right, the rest of this is something that I don't mess with. You're pretty much done with getting ready to print here. So your next thing, let's go here and just kind of talk a little bit about moving things around on the build plate. You can click your STL file. What I'm doing is I'm using my left mouse click to click and hold and drag around. You can put in your specific positions if you want it in a particular place. Here, if you want to rotate it, again, this is all print dependent. If you want to give it a little of a tilt, a little bit of an angle to print it there. If you want to make it a bigger print, you can do that. This is all the basic stuff. Most of you have probably already seen most of this, but I kind of wanted to go through it just ever so briefly, just so if you are new and you're here trying to figure out how do I get started, you kind of get a basic tutorial what this is all about. This is your lay flat on surface. So if you're in an angle or you've been messing around with it and you want to make sure that you're flat on the build plate, always a good idea to do that. If you want to do a cut, you can always mess around in here. This is always very helpful if you have a rather large print that you need to cut. And with here, you can see it's going to cut it straight across. You can always adjust what angle you want it to cut at. If you want it to cut straight up and down, you can do that to break it up into two printable pieces that will fit on the build plate. This is where you can do it. Play around with this. I'm not going to go into it much right now because, quite honestly, unless you're doing a really, really large print, you don't need to do this. And it's so self-explanatory. I don't think you really need to have me sitting here telling you how to do it. All right. So for support painting, if you wanted to do, let me get out of here. If you want to have a certain area that you want support, you can come in here and paint on your object where you want supports to be, and it'll put them there for you. For this object, we don't really necessarily need to worry about that. Seam painting, if you want to dictate where the seam goes, you can tell it you want it to go down the side here completely. Then that's where it's going to put your seam. That's fine. I find that no matter where it puts it, it's an object that you got to deal with and get out of the way during finishing. So you may find that you find it in a certain area is better than others, and by all means come in here and choose that. But for me, I just let it do it automatically wherever it wants. The emboss feature is very interesting. I will be honest, I have not played with it. I will, but for the intents and purposes of this video, I'm not going to go over it right now. And then last but not least, you can do assembly view if you have multiple pieces. You can do some measuring if you want to know how tall a particular object is. And you can see that, and the way it kind of looked at this, you can see that, yeah, that's 30 millimeters. And you can play around with this. It's a little easier to mess with if you're actually dealing with something that doesn't have a lot of curvature or angles to it, but you get the idea of what it can do. It can just tell you how far a distance is if you're curious. And last but not least, let me go back so that I don't have the emboss anymore. You can go to slice plate. So if you have more than one plate, and let me show you how to do that real quick. If you have more than one plate, which up here you can add a plate. And if you wanted to have multiples of these, you could. And I guess we should probably go over that real quick just to kind of show you. So if you hike an object and right click on it, you can fill the bed with copies. You can clone it. You can center it. You can drop it. You can make a mirror of it along a certain axis. So if you have, for example, a droid division droid foot and then only comes with a right, you can come in here and choose what axis you would like to mirror it along so that you have a left foot. You can delete it and you can get a little more granular in here. We're not going to really get into this now, but I wanted you to kind of see the options that you have here, particularly the fill bed with copies and the clone, so that you know that they're here. Now, sorry, back to your plate. So we can slice all plates or just slice one plate. So in this case, this plate here on the right is highlighted, so we're going to slice it. We're slicing it with the perfect settings and the ironing that I have there. And I actually have to choose it. Slice the plate. You can see here it's slicing just that plate. And over here we have the different types of support, how long each inner wall, outer wall, and everything's going to take, and then ultimately what the total time of our print will end up taking. And if you look at here at our preview, if you notice up here preview is highlighted, you can see where it's going to put supports and what it's wanting to support and what type of supports that it's going to use. Now, this is just showing line type. Filament type shows you the types of filaments going to use. This is helpful if you have a multi-material system to where you're printing supports in one type of filament and the actual object in, or STL in another type, or if you have multicolored prints, this comes in real handy to see which colors are going where, rather than just looking at this washed out view here. Sorry, in here you can see the speed at which it is printing certain areas on your print. And you can go down and you can see your layer height and your line width. And this is all stuff. You can see different flow rates, layer time, fan speed, temperature. Most of this you're not really going to mess with. It's just there if you want to see it. And if you're having an issue of a certain kind or a certain type, and you're having a problem understanding why something is doing something it's not supposed to in a certain way, coming in here and kind of looking at what's going on during the print gives you a really good idea of what was happening at that time, and you can try to troubleshoot it a little better from here. Going over a little further past here, we'll go back to our line type. You can see we can look at each layer. So using this over here, you can see what the print is going to look like as it's built up from the build plate and each layer, step by step if you want. And again, this is great for troubleshooting. If you're having an issue with a certain area on your print, you can come in here and try to figure out what it is that's going on at that layer. That's basically everything under this. Over here, you can have the option to export your G-code file, meaning you could export it out of ElegooSlicer, put it onto a USB flash drive and take it to your printer, or take it to, you know, a buddy's house to print it out. If you want to print it, you just click print. And here it knows that, if you remember earlier, we went back here and connected our printer. It knows that, it gives it a name, and it knows that we're going to upload it to that printer. So we're going to upload it to that printer. And we're going to click upload. And in a moment, the printer will start printing. Now again, if you did not clear out the last print that was there, you will see that there's a print in there. So always click your play here just to make sure that you have that build plate cleared off. And also, if you did not clear what was on the screen on your printer, this would not appear. You would have to go over to your printer, either print again or cancel the current print job or complete it, so that this will continue on and print your print job. So in here, obviously, you can see without a doubt that I do not have the upgraded LEDs on this Centauri Carbon, because it's kind of dark in there. But you can turn on your lighting and turn it off. That little light that it is. You can turn your back fan off. Print speed is balanced. You can control your Z height, and you can see the different things that are printed in here. You can see temperatures, and really that's about it. There's not much else really to see in here other than what it is you're printing and the current diagnostics of what's going on with your printer. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. All right, crew. That's it from your captain. I appreciate you watching today, and I'll catch you in the next print. Until then, keep printing tomorrow today.